future of the mighty River Dee may depend on trees.
The River Dee is one of the biggest rivers in Scotland. It starts in the Cairngorms National Park. It has its headwaters, which is the highest of any river in the UK. It's a classic Highland river. It's European designated for its special value of conservation, particularly for its salmon and its freshwater pearl mussels.
It's those pearl mussels that contain treasures worthy of the Dee's royal surroundings, coursing as it does through Balmoral Estate. The jewels in those mollusks are exceedingly rare. About 1 in 5,000 contains these globular natural gemstones, and as such have historically been prized. It's said Julius Caesar had the Roman army invade Britain in 55 BC, in part because of these milky white iridescent gems. They also appear in the crown of Scotland.
They're quite an important historical species for us, that they've had this quite very dappled history of, being poached and used for jewellery over time. The funny thing about pearl mussels is if you ask almost anyone in Scotland, most of them don't know that they exist. Most people have never heard of the fact that we've got freshwater pearl mussels. They're kind of this secret unknown thing.
The mussels are now an endangered species, and though it's been illegal since 1998 to pearl fish or buy and sell Scottish pearls, they are still poached. But there's another challenge for pearl mussels, the decline of salmon.
The pearl mussels release eggs into the water, and when those eggs hatch into tiny little larvae, they embed themselves on the gills of the fish, and that's how they get transported around the river.
A big culprit in the decline of salmon and by extension pearl mussels, climate change.
Yeah, it's an unusual relationship. No salmon means no pearl mussels. So salmon typically require a water temperature of between 6 and 16 degrees. That's kind of where they're happy. And once you get above 20, it gets really very serious for them. Last week we recorded 23.5 further down on the river.
An abundance of trees that once existed here would help cool the river, but deforestation ran rampant in the mid-19th century when Queen Victoria moved to the Highlands and made open estates and grouse hunting fashionable. Trees further disappeared because of fuel needs during the First and Second World Wars, but the River Dee Trust and stakeholders like Art Farm, which owns the Five Arms Hotel, are fighting back.
So in a nutshell, Million Trees Project is a campaign by the River Dee Trust. We want to get 1 million trees into the ground in the River Dee catchment between 2020 and 2035. As of June 2023, we've got 460,000 in the ground.
We've got temperature loggers in the river that monitor every 15 seconds, and we can use that information to prioritise where we plant trees.
One of the elements we've trialled is this technique which we call mob planting, and we put in a high density number of native broadleaf trees without any fencing to see how they would do planted amongst the heather. In a couple of years' time they will be big enough to create some shade over the river.
The Million Trees Project has gotten a boost from a more widely known part of the Scottish ecosystem, whisky distillers.
The whisky industry in Scotland depends on the rivers, the fresh water that they supply. So I think a lot of the distilleries recognise the importance of the rivers and like Burner Benny, realises the need to give something back.
Burner Benny has created specialty casks, the proceeds from which it partially uses to fund tree planting.
We live here on our doorstep, so it's not just the Dee for us, the River Dee, it's the whole area that's, I guess, benefiting from the river being here. The fresh pearl mussels in the River Dee, they're one of the last bastions in Europe, so they became our first heroes.
Salmon and by extension pearl mussels rely on the trees being planted.
There's a phrase that salmon live in woodland, which we don't really think straight away, but they need that woodland habitat around them for a healthy ecosystem.
So by replanting, regenerating these areas is also important for the pearl mussels. Their populations are very fragmented. For them to be able to survive and be viable, they need carbon in the water, they need shelter, and they need to have shade, and they need the rivers to be more stable.